Right. So, without any more ado, I would like to say how very, very appreciative we are of David Astill's giving up his Saturday evening to talk to us tonight. One of the benefits of Zoom is it's possible to ask people from faraway places, if I may call Nottingham a faraway place, pardon me, to come and talk to us without actually them having to come and spend the whole weekend doing it. But nonetheless, we have utterly disrupted Dave's weekend, and we really, really appreciate his time. I have to say that it is very exciting to have Dave here with us tonight because he leads Nottingham City Transport, which is the UK Bus Operator of the Year for 2024. And it was nominated as the top city operator, but then above that became the top operator of all. So I think it's no surprise, therefore, that there are now 49 people on this call because we are all most interested to hear, David, what you're going to tell us. So I will say welcome, David Astill, to the Friends of King Alfred Buses tonight. We're delighted that you have accepted our invitation to come along. Thanks to David Conway for making the introduction. And the floor, as they say, is yours.
Thank you, James. And I've just hurriedly checked my slide pack just to make sure there is a reference to being UK Bus Operator of the Year in it. Don't worry about disrupting my evening. It's one of those weekends where David Conway has been launching new electric buses in Westbridge this morning. So I'll pop down to that event. We have our Staff Excellence Awards tomorrow, which I'll talk to you about this evening. So I'm on a run of 12 straight days at work. So this is day 6 of 12. So don't worry about disrupting my evening. The weekend was already disrupted, so the timing is actually quite good. My plan with your agreement, having spoke with David, he explained that the normal format is to kick off, perhaps explaining a bit about myself, how I got into the industry, what I've done prior to joining Nottingham, where I've been, what I've done. Includes a stint at First's former depot in Chester. And I'm delighted to see that we've got Nigel on the call this evening. Lovely to see you, Nigel. Thanks for taking the time. And I'm also very impressed looking at some of the background screens. I can spot a South Notts Leyland that I think Roland's got. And on my other screen, I can definitely see a Nottingham trolley bus that Freddie's got. So I'm very impressed. Thank you for going to that effort. It makes me feel very much at home. Now, this is where it could all go horribly wrong because James and I are now going to try and screen share, but we can do it in the knowledge that David Conway is in the building. And if it all goes wrong, he will rescue us. How's that?
It's good.
Are we good to go?
We're good to go. There you are. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. So the fact that you've all given up your Saturday evenings, and I should say thank you for giving up your Saturday evening, because it would have been very lonely if you weren't here. And I'm very humbled that there's, I think it's a record attendance at 49. So hurrah for that one. I guess, though, you're here because you've got some sort of fascination with buses, and it's difficult to explain why we all have it. My fascination with buses. Right, so for me, it started a long time ago, before I went to school, like I guess so many of you. You've probably all got a photograph somewhere in the attic of you as a preschool child, either on a bus or with a bus, a bit like mine there. But even knowing that I'd got that fascination, there's always a particular type of bus that I think sparks that fascination. And for me, it was these, the Regent 5, part-oil-bodied Regent 5s that came into the Nottingham fleet long before I was born, 1956. I came along 8 years after that. But I just thought these buses were absolutely fantastic. I guess there's various similarities with London's RTs in that one. But I just thought these were lovely, lovely buses. I was I was very fortunate that on my route, the 45, we were blessed with these Regent 5s. Top left, that's one of them at, some of you who know Nottingham may recognise that. That's Victoria Embankment down by Trent Bridge. Driver set the blind for the return journey to Woollerton Park. And then in the main photograph on the right, we're at the Woollerton Park terminus with the blind set for the return to Trent Bridge. So I love these buses. The route was shared though with these, and occasionally a Leyland PD2 would turn up, which I wasn't nearly as in love with. So I wouldn't say my heart sank when one of these arrived at the stop, but I was never particularly impressed with them. I clearly, from a very early age, had decided that I was an AEC enthusiast. Made all the better by the fact that my gran lived on the 31 route, and we had these AEC Renowns. Again, different to the Regent 5s, because the Regent 5s were rear entrance buses. I guess the Renowns were more of a halfway house, weren't they, with a half cab but door near the front. So very different to what I was used to on the 45. And just to round things off, on the alternative service to Woollerton Park, we had rear engine Daimler fleet lines. So I guess part of my fascination with buses started because on the 3 routes that I used on a regular basis, and like so many families in the 1960s, we didn't have a family car. That was fairly commonplace in the 60s. We went everywhere when visiting family on Nottingham City Transport, but the buses were all so different just on those 3 routes that I think that just harnessed my fascination with buses. And to cap it all off, before I started school, the 39s then received these buses, dual door new Leylands, actually Nottingham's first vehicles bought purposely for one person operation, hence the centre door. But they were running on the 39s, even though it was conductor operated, ready for the first batch of routes to go driver only in January 1970. So by the time I started school in September 69, I felt myself to be quite familiar with the NCT fleet. And indeed, on a Friday when we came into Nottingham to do shopping, I'd often persuade my mum to come down to the depot and we'd have a look at what was going on in the garage here at Parliament Street, where I'm talking to you from tonight. And on one occasion, when I was 4, one of the guys on what I now know to be the running shift, in those days, health and safety wasn't such an issue, was it? Invited me to get onto one of the double-deckers that he was going to take through the bus wash. So at the age of 4, along with my mother, we went through the bus wash in Parliament Street garage in one of the fleet lines. I remember it vividly. And that was a particular treat. He'd be scathed now for breaking all the health and safety rules, but 1969 was very different. For the record, my favourite Nottingham buses were these Willowbrook-bodied Daimler fleet lines. Something about them, I just think they look fantastic even now. Few oddities. I mean, this is very much the Nottingham, what was known as the Nottingham standard specification. If you stare into the windscreen, you'll see the driver has a very high driving position. Driver's eye line was almost always at the top of the windscreen, so they had a view out of the windscreen from the top, which gave them good vision. Interestingly, the front seat top deck offside, you'll see, is turned through 90 degrees. That was to facilitate the periscope that the driver in the cab had to monitor the upstairs, because of course these buses were specifically for driver-only operation. And if you look very closely again through the windscreen, you might just make out the red ticket machine equipment, which was the autofare. These fleet lines were the first buses delivered into the NCT fleet fitted with auto fare equipment. And bear in mind, Nottingham, then as now, NCT wasn't the only operator. There was Trent, there was Barton. I can even remember Midland General with the blue and cream buses. South Notts, of course, Gash. Most of them still had conductors. Trent was experimenting with driver-only operation, but their poor drivers on the one-man services, it was still using a manually wound set-right machine. NCT had moved on to this technology, and it was, wow, space age in comparison. All the more impressive by the fact that NCT had instigated two-way radio with its drivers, had a radio control centre. We have a radio control centre today, very sophisticated. We've got access to all the cameras at all the major road junctions around Nottingham, and we monitor vehicles on real time as well. But going all the way back to 1973, NCT had its first radio control centre even then. So it was always well ahead of the game, and an operator that, as a Nottingham lad, I was always very proud about, and still am, of course. So the Driver of the Year competition 1974, I turned up ready to partake in it, if only I could have done. Of course, at this point I'm 9. But UK Bus Driver of the Year still survives today. Final is in Blackpool every September, I think. On this occasion, the local heat for Nottinghamshire was open to the public. I went along there in my green shirt and green tie, as close to NCT bus drivers' uniform as I could get. And I headed straight for the Willowbrook-bodied Daimler Fleet line to make sure I got my photograph taken. I could probably have done with moving the driver's seat a bit nearer to the steering wheel, but it doesn't look too bad, does it? So at the age of 10, I started taking interest in other things as well, like football. But things were happening in Nottingham that maintained my interest in buses. Some of you will remember the zone and collar scheme. Nottingham City Council adopted what was called the 1972 Transportation Policy, which revolved around pedestrianisation of the city centre, but controlling the flow of traffic into the central core in the morning peak period. And the philosophy was that if car movement was going to be restricted, there had to be a decent public transport alternative. Way ahead of the game. Think of what was happening in National Bus at this time. National Bus, 1977, introduced the MAP scheme, which was all about taking cost out and clearly trying to provide commercial efficient networks. Nottingham was going the other way and putting service in. And this slide pretty much demonstrates what was happening. Peak hour service frequencies were increased by a third, which required the purchase of 97 extra double decks. And as you can see from that table in the middle column there, 10-minute frequencies went to 7.5, 12s to 10, 6s to 5. It was a very exciting time, and quite high profile at that time was the driver recruitment program. NCT was recruiting something like 150 extra drivers to manage this. Even with the conversion of crew-operated routes to driver only, there was still a need to go out and recruit extra drivers, which was high profile in the press at the time. And this was one of the 97 extra double decks brought into the fleet. NCT's traditional bodywork suppliers, which at that time were Northern Counties and Willowbrook, just couldn't meet the demand. And the 97 all-on AN68 Atlantean chassis were bodied by East Lancs. And that was the start of a very close relationship between NCT and East Lancs, which we really carried all the way through to the demise of that business in the 21st century. Now, I'm so pleased. I think the next slide is going to bring particular delight to some of you because I heard you talking about it while I was having my tea. Not only was there the 30% increase in peak hour frequencies, there was also the introduction of the central area services, free of charge, fairly unusual in Britain at that time. Introduced in November 1972, initially as a 6-month experiment. So NCT didn't want to go out and purchase vehicles specific for this. So instead, they hired 4 Leyland nationals from Leyland, not surprisingly. They were destined, there was 4 of them, MPD 108, 9, 10 and 11. They were destined, as James quite rightly said earlier, for London Country, but were delivered from the Workington plant direct to NCT. When they finally left NCT, they never made it to London Country and finished up, as James was saying, I think on the Winchester Town network. Is that right, James?
Yeah, eventually they went to Southampton first, but they were swapped for the 3 Metro Scanias and the King Alfred fleet. That was the thing, which extraordinarily were AOU 108, 109, and 110J. So
Oh, right.
it was even more extraordinary coincidence, really, except that 109 MPD 109L never made it to Hanson Dorset. I don't know what happened to it.
Oh,
But
right. Interesting.
it never did it. But 108, 110, and 111 fetched up in Winchester, yes, and were spent most of their life trundling around Winchester,
Yeah.
painted red, of course.
Right, yes. And clearly, I meant to say, you'll note that that's not the typical NCT shade of green either. That's NBC leaf green with the orange colour coding applied in Trent Bridge Works. So many people think Nottingham didn't introduce colour coding to its network till 2001. Well, actually, we did it as long ago as 1972 on the initial central area service. So it was such a success that a second route was introduced. 77 complemented the 88. The 2 routes were soon carrying 100,000 passengers a week. Now that's some going on a 6-day-a-week service that only ran between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m, carrying 100,000 passengers a week. So it soon became a permanent feature of the transportation policy. Hence, NCT went out and bought its own nationals, 10.3 metre long versions rather than the 11.3 that we saw in the previous slide. But that became a permanent feature of Nottingham's bus offer right through until deregulation and slightly beyond it. The third aspect was park and ride. Now, Nottingham had Saturday park and ride since 1972. In the summer of 1975, I can barely believe it's going to be 50 years this summer, weekday park and ride was introduced. 2 cross-city services operated to a high specification. Interestingly, though, you'll see the hours of operation were strictly the morning and afternoon peak, nothing in the middle of the day. So clearly aimed at the commuter. Now, with the benefit of experience, we know that park and ride is very popular with shoppers, retail workers who aren't necessarily starting and finishing work in those tight designated times. Hence, weekday park and ride wasn't the success that it perhaps could have been. But nevertheless, it meant that 18 of these duple-bodied Leopards came into the fleet in this wonderful livery, base colour of lilac and what was known as Mercedes red stripes. So being lilac leopards, they were christened locally as lilac leopards, and you'll see that they carried the lilac leopard name just below, just to the right of the entrance door. Initially, only the first one was meant to be in this promotional livery. The rest were going to be in standard green and cream, but the Transport Committee was so impressed with the lilac colours that all the park and ride leopards were painted as such. Some further leopards did come into the fleet in green and cream, They were known as white leopards, although they weren't white, they were cream, with bus seats, sliding doors, and they were known as Duple Dominant E-type. And we had 24 of the Duples and one unique one being the Willowbrook-bodied leopard on the left hand, which is the left-hand photograph in the slide. And they were generally used on the Saturday. Well, they were used in the week on stage carriage, and on Saturdays tended to turn up on the Saturday park and rides, which was the 4 weekday sites plus two others, because presumably they were easier for people with luggage getting on a bus with bus seats rather than coach seats. And I mean, unless you were here, it's perhaps unusual, difficult to appreciate how high profile this was. It was on the radio, local press all the time, to the point where Christmas 1975, the Evening Post sent Santa out to ride on the lilac leopards. So if you were a child in Nottingham in 1975, you really believed Santa wasn't coming on a sleigh, he was coming on a lilac leopard. Now I can let you into a little secret. On this photograph, it's not a lilac leopard, it's a white leopard. And I know that because I'm the young lad stood to the right of Santa. So even though we lived on a frequent bus route, I used to persuade my mum and dad to, by then we had got a car, to drive to the nearest park and ride site so that we could come into town on the lilac leopards. But on this particular Saturday, it's a white leopard, and Santa turned up with the local Evening Post photographer, and we were persuaded to do this photo call, and came out quite well. So there I am, 45 years before being appointed as managing director at NCT, in my first promotional photograph in the local press with an NCT bus. You couldn't make it up. So I went through school and college, and then started my first paid employment on the buses at the age of 18 in 1983 at the Trent garage next door to where we are now. And I was employed as a junior traffic clerk with National Express, working in the Nottingham chart room, which was on the top floor of this building that you see in front of you. And I did that on a 6-month fixed term contract. Yes, they even had fixed term contracts in those days. And thoroughly enjoyed my time there. And then after doing that job, I did another 6-month contract in the public transport team at Notts County Council. So I had experience of working for a bus company and a local authority by the time I went off to university. I should say this was the standard National Express fare when I was there in 1983. We've got a Willowbrook-bodied leopard working the Nottingham-London service. Never got to Rapide standard. I mean, Rapide was the big thing in 1983. The Nottingham route at 3 hours 20 minutes wasn't considered a long enough route for Rapide spec, which surprised me a bit, because certainly for a man of my age today, 3 hours 20 minutes is a long way without a comfort stop. So, but as you can see, plenty of people took up the offer. Coaches were very competitive. National Express was very competitive at that time. Rail network wasn't as good as it is today, it has to be said. But frequent hourly service into London with good loads. So I went off to university, did 3 years in Oxford, showing these photographs because, you know, we did a lot of theory at Oxford. We studied the Transport Act 1985 and the Buses White Paper as it was going through Parliament in great detail. And then we were able to see it in practice. This is day one of Harry Blundred's Thames Transit operation. His first local bus route was on the Cowley Road corridor to Blackbird Leys. And there's one of his 16-seater Mellor-bodied Ford Transits on Queen Street, just by Carfax Tower, you'll make out there on the left, in the centre of Oxford. I guess he was the disruptor of his day, wasn't there? I mean, there you've got City of Oxford buses behind, Olympians and VRTs, and this new operator in the form of Thames Transit and minibuses disrupting the peace. The photograph on the right was from the same day. This is the first day of Oxford Tube at what was then Gloucester Green coach station in Oxford. Not a great advert for coach travel, very basic in terms of its facilities. But there you can see the City of Oxford coaches monopolising the main stands. And the Oxford Tube coach is going from basically a made-up bus stop by a lamppost on the edge of the coach station. You'd have never believed then that 40 years later, Oxford Tube would have pushed Oxford Bus out of the London market. But there you go. Things don't always turn out as you expect, do they? But I thought it was worth showing that because that was a remarkable time, certainly in my education process. From Oxford, I went to London for a year, did a master's degree at University of Westminster. Some of you will know Professor Peter White. Peter was my mentor, along with a guy called Roy Turner. They very kindly invited me back 2 years ago when they were celebrating 50 years of the transport group. Made a nice fuss, and it was a great day. And there was plenty of speeches from old lecturers and what have you, and great occasion. Very nice to go back. So, having finished university, I went back to the bus industry on the graduate training scheme. This is at the end of the MBC training scheme. Only 5 graduates were taken on in 1988. I'm still in touch with one of them. Some of you will know him, Gordon Frost, who's currently Ops Director with Go Ahead at Brighton. Gordon and myself were 2 of the 5 that started in 1988. I'll be honest, I don't know what happened to the other 3. Don't believe it. I say it with all respect. I don't think any of the other 3 are still in the industry. But Gordon and myself are still plodding on all these years later. I went to PMT at Stoke-on-Trent, which was subject of a management buyout. You tend to be made, or you tend to make it or break it based on the mentors that you're fortunate to have, don't you? My mentors at this time were Steve Ellis and Mike Frewer. Steve Ellis sadly is no longer with us. Mike Frewer, who was the ops director, he's still around, and I still see him when I go to the occasional PMT reunion. But it just emphasises how important the mentors are that you work with as you're getting on the ladder in the industry. Great days at Stoke-on-Trent and PMT. One of my favourite days, the photograph on the left, was going up to the Workington factory. That had been the Leyland National factory and the Leyland Links factory. At this point in 1989, it was also where they manufactured the Olympians. We purchased 10 of these Cummins-engined Olympians, 6 of them for the Hanley Crew service. I was garage manager out at Crew for 6 years, so I had the good fortune to be responsible for these buses. They were absolutely probably my favourite bus in terms of driving. Every opportunity I'd do a shift on the 320, often the late shift on a Saturday night. This is top of Piccadilly in Hanley, first stop after Hanley bus station. Wouldn't be unusual on the 11 o'clock off Hanley on a Saturday night to leave that stop with a full standing load, but made no difference to the performance of the vehicles at all. They were absolute monsters, beautiful things to drive. Very fortunate to have had them. I think Nigel worked with them later on when a couple of them made their way to the X8, the Crew Liverpool Southport service. But I'll ask him about that later. I worked for them in various places. They also had attended operation in the West Midlands. That's Wolverhampton Bus Station. In the background, there's a WMT, West Midlands Travel Meta Rider, advertising the Wumpty travel card. Early lesson for me in the power that travel cards have. It was so difficult to make any impression on the Wolverhampton market because of the dominance of that travel card. So we used to charge 10p for travel card holders to travel with us, which I guess in the day at that time the standard single fare was probably 35p, so just less than a third of the fare, perhaps the equivalent of asking them for £1 today. But that was highly effective and didn't seem to discourage them from travelling with us at all. I also worked on operations in Stockport and Birkenhead on the Wirral. And then PMT sold out to Badger Line. Now, some of you may recognise this. This is Badger Manor. I guess James might have known.
Yes, I recognise that.
I couldn't tell you exactly where it is. Can you recall?
Yes, it's not far from Weston-super-Mare. It's just off the M5, actually. It's in. You can hear the M5 from it.
Right. Okay.
Not the other way around.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of visiting once Badger Line had taken over PMT in 1994, so 30 years ago last year. In early 94, Badger Line bought Yorkshire Rider in Yorkshire. Obviously, that's stating the obvious, isn't it? And the PMT group. Badger Line was also very keen to get into the Manchester market. So we were encouraged to go and buy out an independent in Manchester by the name of Pennine Blue. And I was appointed at Pennine Blue as managing director. And my task was to basically transform Pennine Blue from a young upstart business being run by former GM Buses drivers into something that could make a serious impression on the market. And we did that over a period of probably 6 months. We went out and changed the colour scheme to red and yellow to ease fleet transfers within the group. We brought in a fleet of Marshall-bodied Dennis Darts into the Tameside network in East Manchester. One of my first jobs was to remove the board of directors that were already there. And that's the sort of experience that makes you grow up very quickly. The back of the gentleman there is Peter McCarthy. He was the one director that stayed with us and indeed remains a good friend of mine to this day. And again, all about relationships and friendships that you build up along your career. As I say, we try to do things properly. There you can see a badger on the back of the bus, which was one of the group dictates. There was no Badger Line livery, of course, as such, no group livery. That's about as corporate as it got. You're still very much left to your own devices, which was fantastic. We tried to do things properly. You know, we had a good newspaper distributed to 95,000 residents. And I say we tried to do the job properly. You'll have to forgive my moustache in that photograph. Not quite sure where that came from. Anyway, progressed to first, as you know, Badger Line merged with the GRT group. I finished up as general manager for Chester, Ellesmere Port and Wirral, which is where I was fortunate to cross paths with Nigel, who's on the call tonight. We did the overground concept, simple routes, easy fares, which was relatively successful. I then moved to North Staffordshire and replicated that. Became a commercial manager for the North Staffordshire operation, and I was there in 2006 when we introduced Scania Omnicity, should I say, into the Potteries fleet. This was 2006, overground branding with the various colour coding, and I think they were the last new buses to go into the Potteries fleet for about 10 years, which perhaps sums up where First was at that time. So we got to 2007 and Nottingham City Transport were advertising for a commercial manager. And I immediately thought, that's my job. that's where I'm going. It's time to go home. I was very fortunate to be offered the job. I joined the senior management team headed up by Mark Fowles, and we talk about mentors along the way. I mentioned that earlier. Mark's probably the most influential person I've worked for in the industry, and was a huge influence on my career. I don't think I'd be here as managing director today if it wasn't for the influence and guidance that Mark's given me over the years. So Nottingham, as you know, we're in the Midlands, very much the centre of England. Nottingham people traditionally went to Skegness and Mablethorpe for their holidays. Very much a straight line, west to east, Stoke-on-Trent, Derby, Nottingham, Grantham, Boston. If you're a good swimmer, arguably Hunstanton, otherwise it's Skegness. And Skegness at Butlins was a regular haunt for Nottingham people on their summer holidays. Nottingham, though, as you'll know, is very much in the south of the county. Arguably the north of the county could perhaps be better suited to being in South Yorkshire, but Nottingham's very much in the south of the county. And Nottingham itself is a very compact urban area. So the greater grey area represents what is really the greater Nottingham urban area. The purple boundary shows you the Nottingham City administrative limits. Traditionally, the Nottingham City never went south of the River Trent, hence West Bridgford, where I live, and Ruddington, which are so obviously suburbs of Nottingham, strictly speaking, aren't in Nottingham City, and then they're not within the jurisdiction of Nottingham City Council. Clifton, on the other hand, that was built in the 1950s, the City Council did get its boundary extended to cover Clifton. So we have a strange situation where half of the urban area south of the Trent is in the city and the other half isn't. And as has to be said, Bridgefordians jealously guard their independence from the city, even though they're totally reliant on Nottingham in many cases for employment, entertainment and education. But demonstrates Nottingham is a very tight urban area. One of the reasons why it's able to claim second highest bus use per head of population outside of London, only bettered by Brighton. Nottingham people make typically 3 times the average number of bus journeys in a year, down of course to the frequency intensity of the network, but the fact that it's such a compact urban area does help as well. So our network really reflects the wider grey area on that map that I've just shown you. And let's talk about this a bit. It's clearly colour-coded, and it's been colour-coded since 2001. So we'll be celebrating 25 years next year. There's a thought. Why is it colour-coded? Well, we do a lot of research with our customers, which I'll refer to in a minute. But we've also done a lot of research with people who don't use buses. And traditionally, the 3 obstacles are, I don't use the buses because I don't understand the route, where all the routes go, can't remember the route numbers, don't understand the route numbers, it doesn't make sense. Secondly, I can't read a timetable and I can't be bothered to find out how to read a timetable. I just want to go out for a bus and a bus to turn up. And thirdly, I don't understand the fares and I don't want the embarrassment of standing at the front of the bus trying to work out with the driver what the fare is, especially when you don't give change, because clearly we've been auto fare operator since 1973. So the management team at the start of the 21st century set about trying to simplify things to overcome those barriers. So the first one, don't understand the routes, don't understand all the numbers and where they all go. That's why we went for the colour-coded network, tried to take the mystique out of the route numbers, even though we now have sequential route numbering on every corridor. We tried to take the mystique out by saying, if you're going to the main hospital, the Queen's Medical Centre, you catch an orange bus. If you're going to the City Hospital in Sherwood, you catch a brown bus. If you go to Trent Bridge just get on a green bus. Don't worry about the route number. Just get on a green bus and it'll take you to Trent Bridge. Second point, can't read a timetable. I just want to go out for a bus and a bus turn up. Well, all those thick lines represent a frequency of every 10 minutes or better. It's fair to say, compared to compared to probably the end of the 20th century, a lot of the white roads on that map would have had a bus service, probably a 27-seat Dodge minibus trundling round infrequently. We stopped doing that in 2001, concentrated on the core network to provide the frequency. So hopefully with that network, the mystique in the route numbers is taken out to some extent by introducing the colours, and as much as we can, we've gone for turn up and go frequencies where you don't need a timetable. Up to 7 o'clock in the evening, we're at least every 10 minutes, and after that, every 20 to 30 minutes, generally every 20 minutes on a Sunday daytime as well. So that's what it looks like on the map. And the third point I should say, that's what it looks like on the map. That's what we look like on the road. I think it's fairly impressive, easy to understand, and it looks professional. Clearly, there's a corporate look to it. The livery's the same layout regardless of the colour. And there are some sub-brands as well, Bridgeford Bus being one of them, which covers buses between the city centre, Trent Bridge and West Bridgeford Town Centre, where between the 5 routes, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, we provide a 5-minute service. So Bridgeford Bus is the sub-brand for that 5-minute frequency. Remember the point, I don't understand your fares, it's too complicated and it's embarrassing, so I'll just get in the car. That's why we went for flat fare. So throughout most of the network that I just showed on that map, it's a very simple on-bus offer, a short hop, a single ticket, a day ticket, and a group rider ticket, which is really aimed at families. It's a family ticket. Of course, the advent of EMV, paying with your bank card, takes so much of the uncertainty away. People now travel by bus, like you do in London, really not quite sure of the fare you're paying, but happy to pay in the knowledge that you're going to get the best fare for the day anyway. Of course, we're part of the £3 fare cap. We're at 2. Our single fare is £3. To be fair, excuse the pun, £3 is where our commercial single fare would be anyway. So we are largely now out of the fare cap scheme. We're back to charging commercial fares. And my gut feeling is the fare cap scheme will finish at the end of 2025. And it won't be a big shock for our customers when that scheme ends, because we're around about there now. We'll probably 20 or 30p increase next year. So we are municipal, but we have a private sector shareholding as well. That private sector shareholding is held by Transdev. Roughly a fifth of the shares are owned by Transdev. Historical going back to 1999, when NCT was in the consortium that won the concessions from Nottingham's tram for 30 years. We needed tram experience. We also needed at the time £5 million to put into the project. That was achieved by selling an 18% stake to Transdev, who in return gave us the £5 million that we needed, but also their light rail experience, with Transdev being a light rail operator all over the world. So whilst we're municipal, we are, strictly speaking, in the private sector. We think we're the fifth biggest private sector employee in Greater Nottingham. The top 5 will be multinationals, and we're talking about the likes of Capital One, Boots, of course, and Experian. We've got 1,100 employees, 800 of whom are drivers. So we've got a very flat staff profile, with the vast majority of our employees driving buses for a living. We've got a fleet of 280 buses. Of course, they're all DDA compliant because they have to be. They all have CCTV cameras. They're all fitted with real time. Nottingham has a very comprehensive and good real time system. They've all got USB charging points, free Wi-Fi. Our average age is 7 currently, which is higher than we like it to be. We like it to be around about 5, because the main competition is the private car. People don't typically drive around in 10, 12-year-old family cars, and we think the age profile of our fleet should match the age profile of the family car. So at 7, we're a bit higher than we want to be, but hoping to put that right in the next few years. Our fleet comprises, well, for a long time, we were very much wedded to Scania. All of our double deck fleet is currently Scania. We've got a few omnideckers left. These have been the mainstay of the fleet probably throughout the 21st century so far. We're down to 9, and our final 9 are working on University Route 4 currently. But if things go to plan, they may be out of the fleet by the start of the new academic year in September of 2025. The mainstay of the diesel double deck fleet is the ADL E400. We've got 62 of these. Very fuel efficient, very cost effective buses to operate. But our largest double deck fleet, interestingly, one of the routes that's got the E400s on is Service 1. Another one of our sub-brands is South Notts. And the gentleman who's got the South Notts buses, his background screen, will know that we purchased the South Notts business out at Goton in 1991. But such is the loyalty and esteem in which South Notts was held. We've always kept the South Notts brand for the traditional main road South Notts service to Loughborough, and that's currently got 7 E400 branded for the Loughborough route. Until very recently, we had some ADL E200 minibuses. They were withdrawn from the fleet on Tuesday last week, much to David Conway's delight, and they're being replaced with electric buses, which I'll talk about in a minute. Our largest batch of buses is 143 gas double decks, ADL, CNG, city bodies, E400s, city bodies with the nice glass staircase, very much based on the design of the new Route Master, but built by ADL at FoKAB. We've got 143 of these. At the time, going gas was the right thing to do. And indeed, James was a great advocate of gas as well as Nottingham. Currently, gas is probably our most expensive fuel, which is a bit of a challenge when half your fleet is gas. But that's just something we've got to contend with. We're certainly going to be keeping them until the certification on the gas tanks expire, which is at about year 12. So our oldest the first ones were purchased in 2017. So we've got those for another 6 or 7 years yet before we start looking to seriously replace the gas fleet. Quite controversially, when going for electric buses, our entire order so far is with the Chinese manufacturer Yutong. I say controversially because, bear in mind, we are municipal. Politicians constantly ask me why we're not buying British. And the truth is, in our opinion, Yutong offer the best product. They're coach-built, quality, sturdy vehicles. We're absolutely delighted with them and haven't had any of the issues that operators running domestic vehicles have complained about. So we're fairly confident that we've made the right decision there. To talk a bit about the university services we operate. Nottingham's got 2 universities, University of Nottingham and Nottingham Trent. They're absolutely so important to our business, so important to the city, of the likes of Raleigh players. They were massive employers in Nottingham at one time. Boots still is, but to replace Raleigh and players, really, Nottingham's universities have filled that void, and we're so grateful to have two prosperous unis. Clearly, traditionally, students are bus users. They provided lots of customers for us. We have three routes. The orange and pink lines serve University of Nottingham. The navy line serves Nottingham Trent University. All operate as local bus services, part of our commercial network. Traditionally, we've done very well. The sort of thing we have to put a lot of effort in, because of course you've got constant turnover of customer. A third of your customers change every year based on a 3-year academic life cycle. We offer an annual academic year pass for £299 and sell thousands of them on the back of it. It's very much about selling it cheap and packing it high. And it's been a great success story for us over the last 20 years. Student numbers nationally are dropping off. Universities are complaining that with the cap of 9,500 tuition fees, it's not the profitable business that it used to be. And we're perhaps starting to see the impact of that. The student numbers, for the first time, appear to be tailing off. The other issue, of course, is that students aren't travelling as often as they used to. And it's a conversation I've had with my two daughters at university. They're paying top of the range tuition fees, and they're doing lectures online and aren't having that one-to-one contact that you would expect undergraduates to be having. So student market's changing significantly at the moment. And so you have to put a lot of effort in, because a third of your customers turn over every year. We go to all the freshers events. We always have a theme. This year's theme was food. Hence, check out your popping bus travel deal. But it goes down with the students and they love it. Social media is so important with students as well. Facebook and Instagram are old hat. I'm fortunate to have a marketing team who understand that. Got quite a young marketing team, actually. They understand the influence of TikTok and other things that I don't, and they're able to take advantage of that. We still have a travel centre. Not many bus companies boast that this year. A lot of the groups have been closing those. We still do printed publicity, leaflet information. We think that's crucial. Don't do it in the quantities that we used to. Yes, a lot of it is online, but we know that a lot of our customers still want the printed timetables. And dear Roger French, when he ever comes to Nottingham to do one of his pods, he's very gracious and complimentary about us. We have a bus partnership. We do have an enhanced partnership in Greater Nottingham, but we have a statutory partnership going back 20 years. As Nottingham has been pedestrianised, you've got the same number of buses, of course, in fewer streets. It does lead to this sort of scenario. This is Parliament Street, the main thoroughfare through the city centre going past Victoria Centre. Politicians complain it's a wall of buses. How are we supposed to compete with the likes of Meadowhall? And the answer is we entered into a quality partnership. It puts a limit on the number of buses that can serve each stop. And by default, obviously the follow-on from that is that if you've got a limit on the number of departures from each stop, it puts a limit on the number of bus movements on each street. And that's been in place quite successfully now, I think, for the best part of 20 years. But it's still getting more of a challenge every day to run a reliable service. David Conway, who's on the call, is our head of operations. He's contending with this. These roadworks were a nightmare in the run-up to, this congestion was a nightmare in the run-up to Christmas as a result of our dear friends at the council instigating an active travel new junction alignment at key city centre junction, which big parts of the day has caused chaos. But I think we can still be fairly pleased with our level of punctuality. Bear in mind, we're supposed to run 95% of services on time. That's the Traffic Commissioner's target. James was telling me about the challenges he has when he's driving his buses around Winchester. So I think to be getting somewhere near the low 90s is something that we can be very pleased about. But we put a lot of resource in to achieve that. We've got the radio control centre that is manned around the clock. David put another 5 buses into the network in the autumn of this year, just to maintain existing timetables. So whilst we can be very pleased with our punctuality, we're also very aware that it comes at increasing cost. We do a lot of work with our customers because we want to know what they think of us, where they think we can improve. We get some very good scores generally. 73% satisfied return up on time. I mean, that's a decline from the previous year, probably for reasons that I've just explained. But 80% of customers are happy that our buses are running frequently. That's a good score. 93% of customers feel confident with our drivers and they drive to a good standard. And 82% say they were greeted by their driver when boarding the bus. And we put so much importance on that as well. Although everyone's these days paying on the phone or paying with a piece of plastic, it's still important that our drivers acknowledge the customer, and it's good that our customers are seeing the benefit of that and appreciate it. And 89% think NCT's got friendly drivers, which is excellent as well. 91% feel safe on the bus. The one area where we don't score very well is that only 69% feel we give them time to sit down before the driver pulls away. And that's a constant source of something that we constantly tell our drivers about. I go and greet all the new drivers on the day that they sign out from the school. And I always say, trust me, it'll make no difference to your timekeeping. Please just wait that extra 2 seconds for everyone to sit down. Transport Focus do the national bus satisfaction scores. We were delighted in 2024 when we came 3rd overall. The highest score for a city operator, Stagecoach in Portsmouth. They only run about 6 buses in Portsmouth, don't they? So we didn't take that too seriously. More bus, bigger operation, but not a city operation. So we were delighted that NCT, with a satisfaction score of 89% against the national average of 80, had the highest score of any city operator. Nearly at the end, I'm conscious it's nearly coffee time. Right, post-COVID, this is what happened to our driver turnover. At one point, it got up to nearly 19%. It was a source of sleepless nights for many of us in the management team. We've listened to our drivers, we've modified shift patterns, which I'll talk about in a minute, and we've got it down. Actually, when we did this graph, it was 11%. I was able to report at the board meeting yesterday that we've got driver turnover down to 9%. So we're doing all the right things. We ask our drivers what they think of us and where we can improve. We've also done an intensive driver recruitment campaign over the last 3 years. We've currently got 6 Scan Your Omni deckers that we've modified, taken out the staircase. This photograph's taken from the driving instructor's seat, so he's got a clear view of what the trainee driver is doing. And at our own expense, we've done this modification to 6 of the Omni decker scanners that we've got. We've recruited like crazy for the last 3 years, and are now in a situation where we're actually back to full strength. But it's not just about the recruitment, it's more importantly about the retention. And we worked through the staff survey. We'd never done a staff survey before 2022. We've now done 2. On the back of that, we've modified our shift patterns, our rosters. And as you can see, from a situation where if you came to NCT, you had to work a 5-day, 3-shift system, with the 6th optional days overtime. We've now got 10% of drivers working part-time, 7% of drivers working their own flexi shifts. So that's a shift specific to the individual. That's been very crucial in attracting ladies into bus driving vacancies. And 7% of drivers are now on 4-day week rotas. So they're working full time, but over 4 days rather than 5. As I say, we work hard to bring ladies into the team. 15% of the team describe themselves as female, and I'm very pleased that 24%, almost a quarter of the workforce, describe themselves as being of ethnic background, because we think it's it's only right that our workforce should reflect the community that lives in Nottingham. These are the satisfaction scores that our own staff give us. So 96% think NCT have got a positive reputation. Almost 95% say they care about the future of the business. Probably the figure I'm most proud of is the 91.58% who say they are proud to work for NCT. I think that's just absolutely fantastic. Some brilliant scores there, and it was definitely worth. There was a lot of reservation about doing a staff survey because there was almost a fear of what they might tell us. Probably one of the best things, certainly since I became MD, one of the best things that we've done in terms of making progress. We have our own Driver of the Year competition. It's the one in the middle, not on the left. We do it as part of the Nottingham pantomime every year. We sponsor the panto, and towards the end of the panto season, we hijack one of the performances. It's exclusively for NCT staff, and we hold our own Excellence Awards as part of that. And the 2025 Excellence Awards is tomorrow, as I mentioned earlier on. We're very proud. We've been doing this for 10 years now. Tika, Jonathan, Jatinder, and Aaron and Les, what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of the 9 have all gone on to either be top national bus driver at the UK Bus Awards or runner-up. So, and these are all people that joined NCT. We've trained them as drivers. They've been through our customer care programs, etc. And they've gone on to be top national bus driver. We're very, very proud of that. This is the photograph from last year's Staff Excellence Awards. We don't just recognise what our drivers are doing well. It's throughout the workforce, engineers, office staff, travel centre. There's awards for all the best teams. And this is the photograph from last year's event. And we're very much looking forward to tomorrow lunchtime's gathering as well. All helped us to be Large Bus Operator of the Year at the Route 1 Awards. And we were all very proud to be UK Bus Operator of the Year at the ceremony in London just before Christmas. Looking ahead, there are some massive challenges. We've got the Bus Services Bill making its way through Parliament at the moment. It's currently in the House of Lords. That gives every local transport authority, or it will do, intends to give every local transport authority the powers to franchise. So there is the risk that our services could be confiscated and put out to tender. We've got the East Midlands Combined Authority coming with a new elected mayor, and we've got on the horizon the prospect of local government reorganisation as well. And there's a possibility that Nottingham City Council may become a greater Nottingham authority, presumably maintaining ownership of their bus company, but we'll have to see what that means. In the photograph on the right, that's me with Simon Lightwood, the Transport Minister. Behind him is Niget Khan, the leader of the City Council, and to her right is Claire Ward, the new mayor for the East Midlands Combined Authority. So 3 influential people that I'm working very hard with to convince them that the best thing they can do with regard to public transport provision in Nottingham is leave it well alone and let us keep doing what we do as well as we do. James, I've made it to the end. Hopefully, bang on cue.
You have. It's amazing. And thank you very much indeed, David, for that tour de force, really. I think if anyone wondered why you guys are top dog operators, it's been shining out from your presentation in so many ways. You're not quite off the hook yet because
Oh, that's fine.
what we're going to do, folks, is declare tea and coffee break now. It's at 8:49, I notice, on the clock. I think what we'll do is we'll start back at 2100, 9 o'clock. That's our opportunity to talk to David, to ask him questions and get him to talk, as it were, freestyle away from his presentation, see what we can discover from him. But I think we should say straight away that's been a marvelous session, inspiring session, I would say. Right, so folks, we'll see you at 9 o'clock. Let's now come back to David Astill and Nottingham City Transport and our topic tonight. Just may I take advantage of being in the chair to ask something which has occurred to me listening, David, to your presentation right the way through from the beginning. And what I have been hearing, and we've all been hearing, is that you are into this hook, line, and sinker, and that you have been interested in the operation of buses in Nottingham since you were small, that you know a great deal about it. It's obvious from what you've been saying that you know a huge amount about it, and I think it radiates confidence in the whole exercise. And I can't help thinking to myself that when you ask your fellow employees about how they feel about NCT, the fact that their managing director is obviously into it and knows about it must register with them. Now, the question I have for you is this. I went to a presentation in Manchester in the autumn, and it was addressed by a very senior person in Greater Manchester Transport, who said that it was not only of no benefit to have people who understood about the public transport industry in leading roles in public transport, but positively negative in its impact, and that what they were looking for was people to lead the public transport industry who hadn't got any background in it and didn't have any preconceived notions, in inverted commas, about it all. So, David, do you think it's been a disadvantage to you to be the obvious expert that you are at the helm of Nottingham City Transport?
That's a very good question, James. And you do hear people say that even in the groups. We don't really want anyone with a background in the industry. We want people from outside. And that you see that reflected in the recruitment of senior officers in the groups at the current time. I'm clearly firmly of the view that the more you know about the industry and the more background you've got, the more able you're going to be to apply to the problems, because so many of the problems have come around before. And we're going through the bus services bill at the moment, potentially massive piece of legislation proposing lots of things that we've done before. Service permits, to you and I, James, they're more like a route license. We've worked with them, we know what it's about, and we know where they work and where they won't work. People from outside the industry will have no view of that. So I'm not going to poo-poo people who come into the industry with no experience. I've worked with a few of them. Some have been successful, some have been a disaster. I guess, like in everything, you need a balance and a mix in the management team of people with external, should I say, business experience. But I firmly believe you need people who have got bus industry background. And if you look at my management team, for example, we have that mix. My HR director is not from the bus industry, nor is my health and safety manager. They're external candidates. But the finance director, David as head of operations, and my head of engineering are all bus people who know the industry backwards.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Right. Our first questioner from the floor is Nigel Lukowski, who is not unknown to you, I think, David. So, Nigel, the floor is yours. Can you put your
I I
camera?
haven't I have unmuted myself.
Good.
And lovely to see you, David. It's
And
been
you, Nigel.
a fair long old while, hasn't it? And I had no idea you knew Gordon Frost. Um,
Yeah,
yes, because of course he was OD at South here for a long while. I'm still in touch with him.
yes. Good.
Yeah, yeah, I had no idea. It's not so much a question, really. It's just to thank you for the kind words earlier on, and to say yes, those Cummins engined Olympians, docks as they were.
You might need to explain that under the Crosville system that because they
Yes. Well,
had prefixes in front of the fleet number, didn't they?
yes. Crossville traditionally had alphanumeric fleet numbers. Dog was double deck, Olympian, Gardner. I'm trying to think of another one. DLB, double deck, low decker, Bristol engine. You could go on for hours on it, but
I'm sure the uninitiated always found it very amusing that they'd got buses in their area referred to as dogs.
Yes, yeah.
From Brian Titherington. Very good thought. Thank you.
The Crossville Wales had single deck for some reason. Well, no, it was our ones, wasn't it? The Optair Deltas. They were SADs, weren't they? Single deck. A for Delta because it was the end letter, and the DAF engine.
Yes.
I can remember SAD, but yes, yeah, and DOC was double deck Olympian Cummings, but yes, they were fair old beasts, weren't they?
Absolutely.
And as you said, on the banks, the X8 to banks.
Yeah. If I may just take the floor for 30 seconds, if you don't mind, James. How is the family? Because how old will your grandchildren be now?
Well, I am sitting in my daughter's kitchen. And you'd answered my question about where your children were. You said they were both at university. Grandchildren are 15, 11, and the little one's 5. So one's doing GCSEs, and one's just started school.
There we are. That's the answer to that then. Good.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you.
If you could lower your hand, you've just done it, so that's brilliant.
Yeah,
okay.
So I'm just about to unmute.
Yes. Thanks very much. Okay, right. Our next question is Nick Richardson. Nick, over to you.
Well, David, first of all, thanks for a most illuminating talk and very interesting. My question is about bus priority, which is presumably pretty vital to your operation. So how much have you got and how much more are you likely to get?
In the city of Nottingham, we have 28 kilometres of bus lane, which is quite an achievement because you saw from the map what a compact area and quite a small administrative area it is. So the city's always been very brave. Politicians have always been very proud to be seen to be promoting bus. Undoubtedly, the assists with that. It dropped into a mute then of its own.
I beg your pardon, that was my fault. Yes.
Okay. So yeah, it's a strange combination. In the city, they're very brave and very willing to put white paint on roads with a bus lane marking. You don't get that in the county. But that's not to say we don't get bus priority, because we do. We get priority on most traffic signals. But to the motorist is oblivious to that. So our drivers know that they're getting priority because we activate the signals, and motorists are unaware. So it's quite a clever way of doing it. So in the city, it's almost clandestine. The bus priority is there. Sorry, in the county, it's more clandestine. The priority is there in a different way, but in the city, it's very, very noticeable because we've got lots of white lines and bus lanes, which are invaluable to us.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next up is James Wade. James.
Thank you, James. Thank you, David, for a great talk. Actually, I also know Gordon Frost to be the schedules officer at Metrobus at Crawley. I saw Gordon only yesterday, and he's absolutely great. Great chap to work with. Really lovely guy. My question is actually operationally, how difficult is it to actually keep the coloured buses on the corridors they should be on? Because I mean, certainly around Brighton and Metrobus, sometimes it can be difficult to keep the route branding buses on the correct routes.
Yeah, good question, James. If you're going to do route branding, you've got to do it seriously. You've got to be serious about it. And we have a vehicle allocator whose responsibility is to make sure the right brands are on the right route. It's part of his job description. So if you're going to do it, you've got to put resource into it. My view is, and you do see it in some parts of the country, where brands are on the wrong routes, it completely kills the whole purpose of it. It gets discredited very quickly. So if you're going to do it, you've got to be serious about it, and you've got to be willing to invest resource in it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? It's not for free, but the benefits are enormous, as you mentioned them. But it's not a free benefit.
Yeah, and it's not just the buses we brand. In a way, the drivers are branded as well because they're rostered to their colour. So West Bridgford has got its own roster of drivers on the green line, similar roster of drivers on the brown line, red line, etc. It's not just the buses we brand. In a way, the drivers are rostered as well, and are very loyal and take great pride in their routes and their corridors. David holds rotorette meetings with them. And I'm sure he'll be able to tell you the debate that generates and the intense sense of loyalty that drivers have with their routes, and crucially, their customers.
Absolutely, thank you for that. I look forward to coming and trying the Nottingham network in the future.
Excellent.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, James. On to Dave. Dave Sinclair's next.
Yes, well, again, I wanted to add my thanks. I'm more of a car person, I'm afraid. I embarrassingly admit, but that was really fascinating hearing about buses and the whole technology. But also, I wanted to thank you for your personal story. I think it's heartwarming to see somebody who finds something they love doing and actually does it well and so forth. And maybe that's a lesson for our children to follow on. But I have a proper technical question, and that is, I'm interested in electric vehicles. Have you looked at the possibility of getting green energy from electrical hydrolysis of water, generating hydrogen, and then using that to run your buses? Because that would be a properly energy safe method of saving the planet.
We haven't. Hydrogen is on the agenda. The Bamfords at Uttoxeter seem to be quite keen on exploring the possibilities of hydrogen. You'll probably be aware there's a hydrogen operation in Crawley that has struggled to get off the ground because the biggest issue has been the supply of hydrogen. We had a similar issue. I mean, before we even went with gas, we tried ethanol. Back in 2008, the idea then was that East Anglia, the fields of East Anglia were going to be growing rapeseed to produce ethanol. It didn't happen. We finished up. Ethanol was coming over the North Sea in huge tankers. So although it was quite environmentally friendly at the point of use, the whole journey was not environmentally friendly at all. And they appear to be having the same issue with hydrogen. Supply is the issue. You'd have thought with someone with the influence and finances of the Bamford family, they may be able to make some impression on that. We'll have to wait and see. One of the big advantages of hydrogen is that you get a better range than you get with an electric bus. And interurban operators, I think, are rubbing their hands and waiting for the hydrogen project to take off because they see the future for them probably being a hydrogen rather than electric. But I think for an intense urban operation like ours, where our buses do a lot of hours, but not a lot of miles because our operating speeds are so slow. Electric power is absolutely fine and probably the right choice for us.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dave, for your question. It's very interesting. I'm sure this whole area is still in evolution, isn't it? My sense is that when historians come back and look at these sort of 2010 through to 2040, we'll see things looking a lot different from what they look now. I mean, they've changed amazingly in 10 years. If you think
and fleets may not be standardized on one source of power. I think ours in time will just be electric, but other operators with more varied operation will probably have a mixed fleet.
Interesting, isn't it? Okay, thank you, Dave, and thank you, David. Right, Roland, you're next.
Thank you, James. And David, thank you very much. Very interesting to hear all about both you and Nottingham City Transport. I just have a question: what's the interaction and the sort of status between yourselves and the trams, and how do you work with them, or are you do you see them more as a competitor?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixed bag, really. I mean, NCT was in the concession, the original concession, to design, build, maintain, and operate the tram. Unfortunately, the contract was set up so that when the city council as the promoter decided to extend it southwards, they couldn't automatically award it to the existing concessionaires, and it had to go for re-tender, and it was picked up by Keolis, which was a shame. Up to that point, NCT passes were valid on the tram. There was no premium. You could travel on bus and tram with an NCT travel card at normal prices. When we were split away from the tram went into the new concession, the City Council, to their credit, introduced the Robin Hood multi-operator travel card, which not only covers NCT and tram, but also covers Trent Barton in the Nottingham area as well. So arguably that's an added bonus for customers. But it does mean there's now a premium because multi-operated ticketing comes with a premium price. So the user has missed out there. But the whole debate about multi-operator ticketing is very interesting. I might be going off it's a bit of a tangent, but we look at the usage of multi-operated tickets, the people using them and the journeys they make. 80% of the journeys made on a Robin Hood multi-operated ticket at a premium price are made with NCT. And we always wonder, why are they doing that when they could have, a lower price version on our Easy Rider brand? And the question you ask yourselves, are people paying that premium is it a premium they think it's worth paying just on the off chance that they might want to catch a tram, or they might want to catch Trent Barton if NCT, for whatever reason, bus doesn't turn up, which is most unusual, of course. But yes, it's an interesting topic.
Right, good.
And I suppose to answer your question, we haven't withdrawn from the areas that the tram serves. We like to think we're complementing the tram rather than competing with it. But yes, there's an element of competition there, of course there is.
David, what's been happening to overall travel numbers in the Nottingham area?
Well, the market has grown. There is a graph, I haven't got it on the presentation, that misleadingly shows public transport use growing and the biggest growth being on the tram. But what you've got to remember is, just before COVID, the tram was carrying 18 million passengers a year, but at least 8 million of those had previously been bus users. So all the growth wasn't tram, bus was growing patronage as well. And to put it into perspective, for every passenger journey on a tram in Nottingham, there are 3 passenger journeys on an NCT bus. So the tram is important, it's high profile, but NCT bus remains the dominant form of public transport in Greater Nottingham.
Right, thank you. Now, Tim Stubbs is next. Tim.
Yeah, just complimentary question to that last point. Do you operate services which feed the tram, or do you just run through in parallel with the tram?
We don't. We tried when we were operator of the tram. We tried feeders, and they were a altogether diabolical failure. People don't want to interchange. They want to get on the bus or the tram and complete their journey. They don't want to change. The exception is probably in the city centre, where you're transferring between very frequent services. But generally, the feeders that we tried around Bulwell, and it was the Bulwell estates into the Bulwell tram stop, particularly that we tried it with, they were unmitigated disaster, and it's something we won't do again, certainly on a commercial basis.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Tim. Right, David Lee Kong.
Hi, David. Great talk. Thank you for that insight. And it seems to me that Nottingham's got that magic mix of having the right place and infrastructure to deliver services, the right company in terms of Nottingham City Transport and your approach and your team. One of the things that I'm intrigued to know is it's one of the few places that's got a work parking levy in the city.
Parking levy, yes.
Yeah, and I just wonder what your view on that is, and how did it affect bus travel in the city when it was introduced?
So the workplace parking levy applies to all employers within the Nottingham city boundary who have 10 or more parking spaces for staff. And I think it's currently about £300 per parking space per year. Unfortunately, at £300, that's still lower than an annual bus pass. So it's not our view that it's actually encouraged modal shift. And I think the council deliberately set it at a level not to do so, because they need the revenue that the workplace parking levy generates. Locally, it's referred to as the tram tax. It's very unpopular with those that pay it, of course, and that includes our staff. They have to pay it. But it's very cleverly done, and I'm not sure you can necessarily replicate it elsewhere. If you think of the map that I showed right at the start of the presentation, no, not at the start, sorry, halfway through, Nottingham City Council boundary is very tight. I talked about West Bridgford. West Bridgford people live in Nottingham, but they don't live within Nottingham City Council's area. So the City Council were able to introduce it, knowing that probably the majority of people who are going to pay it don't live in the City Council administrative area, hence it would not be an issue at local elections. So it's very cleverly done, and you can't necessarily replicate it elsewhere for that very basic reason. And when other cities have talked about it, I think it's only when the pennies dropped about the administrative area that they've then decided not to do it.
Thanks for that. Great.
Yes, that's very interesting, isn't it? Which is always the lesson you have to take from looking across at what the chap in the next desk is writing, because copying it might not produce the same result.
Oh, it could be very dangerous. Yeah,
very
unintended consequences.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, folks, you have David Astill here. You can talk to him. You won't be able to do that in 10 minutes time or half an hour or whenever we finish this. So do take the opportunity, because you have an eyewitness. You know, this guy runs the best bus company in the UK. Don't let this chance just fall through your fingers. Tim Stubbs.
I want to ask about buses that drive themselves. I'm not thinking about on the street, but in the depot. Is there an opportunity for the future to benefit your staff levels by having buses that will shunt themselves and park themselves when they're on your premises?
I'd like to think so, Tim. I don't think that's the obvious way to use an autonomous bus, so that running shift people can be doing, and cleaners can be doing more useful things like cleaning the buses rather than shunting them around the yard. I've got no in-depth knowledge of it. I haven't sampled I have. David and I sampled autonomous bus at Yutong, didn't we? At the Yutong factory in China. Remarkably at ease with it. I mean, I know it was on their factory site. The people working there were familiar with them, but there was huge trust in them, and people were quite comfortable to walk in front of them, knowing that they weren't going to go and run them over. I have had experience of them, and remarkably at ease riding around on them. But yeah, I don't think they're going to be on city streets in Britain anytime soon. The depot environment, it would be the obvious place to utilise them.
Very interesting. I think that RATP in Paris have an experiment running in one of their depots for self-parking, and I think that we all ought to have a look at that, because I suspect the problem with it is it's probably rather expensive, and probably much more expensive than having a couple of clever shunters. On the other hand, if you've got shunters who aren't so clever, it might be a different thing altogether, mightn't it?
Yeah, and if you've got a purpose-built garage with a reasonable layout, you could make it work. I think we run out of a 1920s tram shed where everything is parked to an exact point because it's so tight. Autonomous might struggle with that. I don't know.
I must say, this has nothing to do with the price of eggs, but a friend of mine has a big BMW. Listen to me, swanking by association, and he's not very good with it. And he said, "Oh, I can't park it in the air," which I thought, well, I could. But anyway, and he got out of it and used his telephone to park it, and it parked itself. I was absolutely astonished. I've never seen
it nearer than we think. Perhaps the technology is nearer than we think, James.
You know? Well, yeah, that's what I was wondering. So it's interesting, isn't it? Just to know what's around the corner. Meantime, of course, the politicians are up to God knows what. So that's
well, they are, and that was one of my slides, wasn't it? Just while I wait for anyone to ask a question, you know, we've got the East Midlands Combined County Authority coming. So what you may not appreciate is that the local transport authority's responsibilities that are currently held by Nottingham City Council are going to pass at some point in the next 15 months to the new East Midlands Combined Authority. And now that's a change. So that means that my majority shareholder won't be the Transport Authority.
Yes.
It's going to be a change. Nottingham's enjoyed being a unitary authority since 1998, and so much of what it's achieved public transport wise, it's done as a unitary authority. And when this much greater area becomes responsibility, we'll have to see what changes. I don't think there's any way the combined authority would have ever introduced the workplace parking levy for the reasons as I explained earlier. So it's going to be a very different situation.
It's very interesting. I mean, in our local situation here in Hampshire, it is proposed that the old Hampshire County Council, which is a shire county that's lost in the past, lost Southampton and Portsmouth, two big cities which are currently unitaries, and then the Isle of Wight sitting on its own down Southampton Wall or somewhere. The proposition is to turn that into a single entity, and with its own mayor and so on. And the people in Portsmouth are getting very scared about that, because Portsmouth City Council has pursued quite a strong policy of favouring public transport, which its colleagues in other places haven't. And I'm interested to think how that's going to work. So, but in your case, the risk of breaking the china on the way, it seems to me, is much higher, as it is in places like Reading as well.
The mayor's going to need a very strong guiding hand.
Yes, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Right. Anything else from anyone else? I must say that I'm pleased to hear that you're going to be withdrawing your 9 long wheelbase Scania omnideckers, because everywhere you look in this part of the world, there are ex-Nottingham Scania omnideckers floating around. You can tell them because of the funny seats you have. I can always distinguish them from the ex-Reading ones that are also to be found in this part of the world. But the Nottingham ones, some of which, of course, ended up in Reading,
they always go for a very good price, because most of them are 86, 87 seaters.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're ideal for school contracts.
Yeah. So
we have a waiting list of operators wanting to buy them.
I bet you do. Yes, in fact, you could stop running buses altogether and just sell them, perhaps. Right, folks. Is there anything else that anybody else would like to ask? James Wake. Thank you, James. Come on.
Yeah, actually, obviously being at Metrobus, obviously I'm quite well included on the hydrogen side of things. But before I worked at Metrobus, where I started last year, I worked for ITP as a scheduler for nearly 11 years at Fulwell. So obviously saw the electrification of Fulwell Garage, and it has almost come fully electric now, and how that seems to be TfL's philosophy of how things are in the future. And I think I agree with what you say, David, with regards to how the mileage is quite adept for like London routes in particular, and seems Nottingham routes to electric vehicles, whereas obviously Crawley has a lot of routes that go into the country, like Crawley to Brighton, the longest route is like 30 miles. So that's 60 miles round trip. An electric bus would probably need recharging after 2 round trips on that route, for instance. But yeah, I mean, it's the storage of the hydrogen that seems to be the big one at the moment. But as I say, the vehicles, and as well, there's been a few things with the vehicles. But I mean, on the whole, the drivers are liking the hydrogen vehicles on the whole. They're quick off the mark, like an electric bus. It is super quick on the pedal.
I'm sure there'll be demand for them if someone can get it right.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
And if you think about it, we've been through this with natural gas buses, with electric buses. I mean, the electric buses we have today aren't the ones that people started with. So who knows where this is all going? David Lee Kong.
I just want to ask a question, going back to your formative years, really, about you talked a lot about Nottingham City Transport, obviously as your local operator, but what's your recollection of Barton Transport? Because they were unusual in being one of the largest independents at the time, and I think
they were the largest independent, weren't they, James?
Possibly, yes, very nearly. If they were.
My recollections of Barton's in the 70s was a fleet of Leyland Leopards or Bedford YRTs, all with Plaxton bodywork, all with a folding door so that they qualified for the bus grant, but they were really a coach. So they were used extensively on Barton seaside specials, from Nottingham and Derby to Llandudno, Skegness, Brislington, and all the rest of it. With drivers in scruffy brown jackets, often smoking at the wheel, fairly unregulated and an undisciplined bunch. Wasn't the quality operation that it may have been in the 50s. I think by the 70s it was pretty, as I say, undisciplined workforce, and lots of Plaxton Bodies coaches, all the same. The only thing was, wherever you went in the UK, you were pretty certain of seeing one.
Yeah. Oh, there we are. Yeah.
Thank you. I remember them in the 80s in similar format, when it was always a treat to go on one to Nottingham from Derby, you see. So you always wanted to go on the Barton one as opposed to the Trent one, but interesting to hear your thoughts.
I mean, as late as 1984, I can recall on the Fives, Nottingham Derby, with new Plaxton Paramount 3,200s, really.
Yeah.
In the peaks, they'd have a conductor on. Why would have a conductor on a coach in 1984? That's sort of how old-fashioned they were. Yeah.
Right. So yeah. Oh well, progress is good, isn't it? Folks, I think we've probably done what we came to do tonight. It's quite a an ask of a managing director of a proper professional bus firm to set aside an evening before his big event tomorrow to put together a presentation for us, which I think is a great tribute to us, that you, David, found the time to do that, or made the time to do it. But I think from our point of view, we've been very privileged indeed to listen to what you had to say tonight and to hear your responses in the more informal discussion. And we do thank you very much indeed for doing this for us. And I think it speaks volumes for what you do, and you can see that what you do for us is as it is what you do for everybody else. And no wonder, therefore, that Nottingham City Transport is going from strength to strength. So I'm sure we do all congratulate you and your team for what you are achieving day to day. And buses is about the next day's run out, isn't it? And then all the usual things. But
it's also, James, and you'll be the first round on this, and we'll have this discussion with David Conway. We run buses, but it's all about the people, really.
Yeah, it's all about the people. So there you have it. And so, ladies and gentlemen, will you please put your hands together for our speaker? It's very useless, this, because you don't hear it, David, but you can see it. You can see them clapping. You just can't do it. But thank you very much indeed. Now, just before we leave the call tonight, there's a couple of things to say. The first is that in a month's time, exactly on the 8th of March, we have another stunning presentation coming our way, quite different. Whilst this is today's bus operation, and next time we're going back into old vehicles and collecting vehicles, when our member and trustee William Staniforth will be giving his, well, almost life story. And I can tell you, because I've had a bit of insight into it, it's absolutely fascinating. So make sure that you're on the call on the 8th of March. But it is our great luck, really, that we're able to mine two completely different types of energy in FoKAB, the retired buses, as it were, but also today's. And so David has been a fantastic example for us of what is going on right now. One last thing, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, David.
If I can just say one thing, I mean, thank you for your attendance. The numbers that have turned out tonight are absolutely fantastic. And it's been my pleasure, because I'm so proud of what we do. I'm always very happy and enjoy talking about it and sharing it with you. So thank you very much for attendance.
Yeah, well, thank you, and it shows. Now,
thank you to David for being in the background to make sure the IT works.
Yes, and yes, he's done a grand job, hasn't he? So David Conway, who is does a grand job for us in many other ways as well.
I'm sure he does.
Yeah. Now, before we go, remember that if we were in the hall together, if we were looking at our speaker and shaking him by the hand, we would be leaving through the doorway. And were we doing that, we would be passing our treasurer, who would be waving his bag, into which you would generously drop a £5 or a £10 or something like that. And we would say, thank you very much, that's very good. Obviously, we can't do that at these meetings, but we still get through money like a hot knife goes through butter in FoKAB. So if you have enjoyed tonight, please do go to our website, press donate now, and think of a number. Anything you like, the more the merrier, and waft a bit of loot in our direction, because remember that we spend money like it's going out of fashion. So thank you very much. Thank you, David, most of all, for your contribution to our pleasure tonight. Thank you, everybody, for coming on, whether you're from Canada, from Switzerland, from York, from Winchester, wherever you are across the country. Thank you for coming on and listening so avidly. Thank you for your questions. And I could say, have a good journey home. But for most of you, that just means turning away from the screen and settling into the armchair. So thank you, David. Thank you, everybody. That is the end of tonight. See you next time.
All the very best.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.